Welcome to the second edition of PD2TEACH with Texas Council Teachers of English Language Arts. We have a new group of folks today to talk about response skills and to talk about multiple genres. So let's look at the knowledge and skill statement for response skills. So if I look above the gray box there, it says that the student responds to an increasingly challenging variety of sources that are read, heard, and viewed. What do you make of the change of the word from texts to sources?
When I think about this term source, I think the first thing that my mind goes to is research, because that's what we constantly think about sources is with research. And so I think that as I work with this skill, I want to be really careful to think of sources as being much more than just associated with research. It's really looking at it from read, heard, or viewed. It's more of a multimodal idea of sources, and I'd want to be aware of that when I'm working with my students.
As we're educating in high school, getting them prepared for either post-secondary or whatever they're going to be doing in their lives. We live in a time where you have to get your information where you get it. So, it could be a newscast, it could be anything. And having them choose their own and think about what information am I getting and evaluating that. Do I believe this? Do I not believe this? And we live in a world of fake news and everything else. So, I think it's a great way to term it, because we don't have just newspapers giving us information. Our information comes from many different sources.
Well, and I think it also brings up the visual literacy that we are going towards, because students are so inundated with visual. And this allows students to look at art, to look at advertisements, to look at different forms of media. And it allows them to build those skills. And working with the primary students, I noticed that we've got a lot of kids coming to us now that really have a hard time communicating on things that they see, things that they view. They're not having those conversations at home, and this allows us in the primary grades to really build those skills to be able to respond to things that they hear from their other classmates, from their teacher, from the principal, all around them. So it really does open this wide up for students to really be able to communicate effectively.
I think what both of you are hitting on is the idea that our students are no longer passive acceptors of sources. They are active listeners and readers and visually looking at things. They can't just sit back in a class or sit back in life and just look at things. They have to look at them, they have to understand them, they have to listen to them, and then respond in some way. And I think this strand hits on that from K all the way to 12, so that our kids learn that at very early, and then when they go out into society, they can do that as an adult.
They've got to, even in third grade, begin growing themselves to think in that way about multiple texts, and all of those things about listening with them, speaking with them, reading, writing, and thinking. What is your reasoning process that you're going about using as a response to those sources that you're presented with or that you chose to make decisions about life?
As I read through the response skills strand, I can't help but be struck by how closely it walks with the comprehension skills strand. And each of these, there's such a level of metacognition that's being expected of the learner and understanding their thinking as they move through and respond. And as you move from A all the way through, it grows. And in that level of metacognition on the student's part grows. And I think that really goes back to John's comments about students growing up earlier. We're really asking students to be thinking about their thinking from a very early age.
I agree, John. I look at the very first one, and I think the writers of the standards got it correct, where it says describe personal connections to a variety of sources, which we now know are different types of text, including self-selected text. I think this is a gateway for a teacher to be so impactful with a student, like you were suggesting, Barbara, because it's starting with the basic, how did that make you feel? Did you like that? Did you not like that? And that opens up numerous doors to start to shaping perspectives of how kids think. We were talking about, Jonathan, the fake news and the fake sources, and it really opens up, well, why did you think that? The level of, the depth of questioning that could be started with such a simple thing of how did that make you feel? What was your personal connection to it, including the fact that they get to self-select those texts, that's like something that means something to them as a jumping off point, instead of, oh, here, I want you to read this and have a personal connection to it.
And I really think here that you're right that A is so important, because I think about our students, and I think about it with high school learners, and for me, how incredibly important it is for a high school learner to be able to determine bias and credibility. And you can't begin to determine bias until you determine your personal bias, which comes from understanding your personal connections to a text. So I think that that's a huge piece as we deal with the fake news world, as Jonathan mentioned.
So I want you to take a minute, and I want you to look at this strand. And what do you hope teachers come away from this with what Barbara said? You know, teachers need time to digest and think their way through this and consume this strand and say, this is what it means for my grade level. So take a few minutes, think about it, jot down some notes.
Well, I'm going to start at the bottom with primary. And what I really want the teachers to see, that these are process skills that connect to all content areas. For most elementary teachers, they are self-contained. They teach all content levels. All of these response skills are not language arts skills. They are skills that go into every content area, like we were talking about a while ago. So I think they're also not only that, they're not only content area skills, they're life skills. They help produce productive citizens because of that respectful communication, the respectful discourse. It empowers our students to have voices, but that have voices with thought behind them.
The first step is that you react and you think about it, you know. The second thing is that you make reasoned decisions as you are thinking critically about what it is that you're looking at. And then the last thing that I think is you're using that response to make a decision about what you're going to do with it. So you're figuring out how you're going to apply and mix that in with everything else in your life, your values, your culture, your family, and the next step that you're going, whether it be what you're going to read next or how you're going to choose to talk about that topic with your family or your friends when you go outside.
These strands basically tell me that the days of a couple of styles of text are over. They're done. We cannot just bring certain styles and certain visuals into a classroom and think that's it. We've got it covered. We've got to teach these kids authentic. And which brings me to the next point. Students have to take control of their own learning and decide what's important to them, because once they catch that flame, that fire won't be put out. And then the last big point that I've noticed with these strands are that you can't just isolate one. Before you could. You can't do it anymore without bringing something else in. And so it requires a student to be more responsible to make up on, you know, the left side if your right side is very, very strong. And so that's big.
I completely agree, John. I just was thinking, to be an ELAR teacher right now is such an exciting time. I can't imagine being a part of such a huge process of watching these kids shape their thinking and learn how to do that appropriately. And Barbara, like you had a second ago, had an epiphany. That learning that's all over a kid's face when they reach that point, that is just such an exciting thing to be happening with our standards. It's not so much cut and dried anymore. It's about kids going, oh, I get it. I disagree, but I see your point of view. I mean, like using the spoken language and the written language and to make their point appropriately and to learn from others. Can't imagine a more exciting time in a classroom.
Same place. And I was reading through this strand, and Kelly, I was using your stimulus. What is it we hope for our teachers as they work with this in our state? My hope is that as teachers work with this strand, that they come to the understanding that the heart of the strand is about learner empowerment and empowering our learners. And it's about teaching our students how to raise their voices in ways that others will listen. Because that's where power comes, is not only when you know how to raise your voice, but how to raise it in a manner that others will listen.
So thank you for this robust discussion of response skills. And I want you to hold on to that as we move into multiple genres, and this is why. We can get bogged down in the academic vocabulary of multiple genres, but remember some key words from today, that we are talking about a creator of a source, not just an author. We are honing academic discourse, and it is that learner empowerment.